Infections. Did you acquire one in the hospital? Did you already have one and the hospital didn't treat it properly? That's what we're going to talk about today in our new video. Welcome back to the Williams, ELLEBY HOWARD EASTER YouTube channel. I'm Joel. This is Mark. So let's dive right into it, Mark, and talk about infections. I think the first thing we should talk about is, how is the infection acquired? Is it in the hospital? Is it before you get to the hospital? And does that make a difference if you're looking into making a medical malpractice claim?
Sure. I think everybody's had an infection at one time in their life, whether it's a cold or they had a cut that got red and inflamed because they didn't put antibiotic cream on it. So we're all familiar with infections, and in fact we just went through a pandemic where there was infections worldwide. But it makes a difference in a medical malpractice case because if it occurs under the care of a physician, such as post-surgery, maybe protocols weren't done to prevent a potential infection, or maybe it might be having your arm stuck with a needle and someone didn't take the precautions of washing their hands, wearing gloves, cleaning the site, making sure that the needle was not contaminated. Mm-hmm. Those are all acquired infections in a facility. Mm-hmm. Then there might be an infection that you just got out into the world. Most people are familiar with that, but that it wasn't responded to the right way.
Yeah, so it's a big difference from a legal perspective when we're looking into infection cases, where if it's hospital acquired, there's one area where we're going to look in to see if the standard of care was breached, where did the hospital, did the doctors, the nurses, and all that follow these certain safety protocols to make sure that they minimize the chance that you get an infection in the hospital, where we wouldn't have that analysis if the infection was acquired outside of the hospital. So if somebody got a cut and they got MRSA outside of the hospital and they went to the hospital to be treated for the infection, we obviously wouldn't try to blame the hospital for causing the infection. In a situation like that, if the infection continued to get worse and worse and worse, once they were admitted to the hospital or under the care of a physician, we would look to see, did the hospital or the care team, anyone on the care team, adhere to the standard of care with treating this specific infection? I think that starts with identifying what type of infection it is, right?
That's exactly right. And there can be any number of infections, and most of us have heard of them. You could have a virus, you could have a bacterial infection, or you could have a fungus. And there are different ways to test those infections, and depending on the kind of infection it is, it might dictate the response, because some infections might not be serious, or they might be slow-moving infections. Other ones are things you've got to get hold of and take care of immediately. Yeah,
because like Mark said, some infections, once they get into your body, if they enter your bloodstream, they can disseminate very quickly and attack organs or different joints, different places in your body. And when it starts spreading throughout your body, that's when you're getting into trouble. So the first step that the care team needs to take is identify what it is, because, for example, if you have a fungal infection, but the care team misidentifies what type of infection it is and they treat you with something else, sometimes the treatment for that other thing could cause the fungal infection to get worse and cause you more damages, right? So there can sometimes be negligence in identifying exactly what that infection is.
That's true. And for instance, if someone was thought to have had a viral infection, they might be given steroids. But a fungus loves steroids. It's like food to the steroids. And so if you misidentify an infection and prescribe a treatment wrong, you could cause more harm instead of helping a patient.
Yeah, you could actually make it worse. And I think that's why it's so important that doctors and nurses are trained to pay attention to symptoms that the patient is experiencing when they're going through this, what we call a differential diagnosis, where they're trying to rule out certain things and then consider what's the most likely scenarios. Because in most situations, in order to know exactly what it is, then you're going to have lab results. So the blood or urine or something is going to have to be sent to a laboratory to do testing on it. And then they'll send it back and say, here's the results that we have. And then based on those results, then there may be additional testing that needs to be done to it. So let's just say they think it's a bacterial infection. there may be additional testing that's done to see what type of bacteria it is, because if it's MRSA versus some other type of infection, the antibiotics that are given may be completely different, right? So when you're looking at this, there's certain things that may need to be done to save the person's life, and that has to be done prior to lab results coming in. But in other situations, you need to order lab results, which brings us to the next point, is that in this whole process, sometimes it's not necessarily the doctor or the nurse. It could be the lab itself that either doesn't process results on what we call STAT, meaning urgent, if the doctor orders them STAT, or the lab does something to contaminate the sample or doesn't test the sample correctly, or the lab may not properly return the results to the physician, and if that doesn't happen, then the physician doesn't have an opportunity to provide the care. Now, we could keep on going down this rabbit hole, but if it's STAT and the lab doesn't return it to the physician and the physician doesn't follow up, then it could be the lab and the physician's fault, right?
Exactly. And just like, any area of life, the more steps you have in a process, the more things can go wrong. And that's why hospitals, doctors' offices, laboratories, they typically have policies or protocols in place that have a series of steps, and it would have forms or requisitions that say, this is what I'm asking for, this is how urgently I need it. And then those steps have to be followed according to that. And if someone didn't follow those steps, then that's when malpractice can occur.
Yeah. And let's just assume it's a situation now where all of those steps were followed, but an infection happened anyway, right? It's not foolproof. There are infections that happen regardless of how cautious the medical care team is. But in those situations, if the medical care team responds appropriately and identifies the infection, great, that's what they're supposed to do. But if they don't, then we may be looking into what was the response by the medical care team, and did they follow the standard of care once an infection was identified.
Exactly. And just like the steroid example earlier, it might be great for a virus but not for a fungus. Or you may miss an infection altogether before it's identified and go on to try and treat some other condition that's not an infection. And it all depends on what steps were followed and what tests came back that dictates the speed of treatment and what kind of treatment.
Yeah. So from how you got the infection to how the infection was identified to how it was treated, how quickly it was treated, all of these things could come into play for any medical malpractice case involving infections, which brings us to the next point as to what you need, assuming you can identify which one of those areas the negligence occurred in. Like, what's the next step? What else do you need in order to bring a claim?
Sure. Well, you need an expert. And if anybody's been watching our videos, they'll hear this as a recurring theme, is that in any medical malpractice case, you need an expert. And most of the time, you need more than one expert. And in this type of case, let's say there was a question about whether a doctor in the hospital committed malpractice, whether a laboratory committed malpractice. You would need both a hospital doctor and a laboratory expert to talk about whether there was negligence. And then after that, you might need an infectious disease doctor or even a critical care doctor or something like that to talk about if the right treatment had been given, would it have made a difference?
Yeah. So you're going to need an expert on the law.
Yeah.
Somebody that knows these type of things, but you're also going to need an expert in the fields of medicine, because we are certainly not experts in the field of medicine. We know a little bit about it because of the types of cases that we handle on a daily basis, but the law in most states is set up to where if you want to bring a claim, you've got to have those experts in place to say, this doctor, this nurse, this laboratory, whatever, did not meet the standard of care, meaning they were negligent in whatever it is that they did. But I think that's the biggest thing about infections. I mean, they can be, like you said, they could be something that causes you to get a little red spot on your skin and then you're fine. It could be something that kills you. And it's important that our medical providers are able to identify and properly treat those things in a timely manner. So, anything else on infections that you can think of?
No, I think we've about covered it. I would just urge anybody who is wondering whether they have an infection to go see someone right away. Because those things can take off pretty quickly.
They can, for sure. All right, well, we hope this video has been helpful to you. If so, give us a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button. Otherwise, we will see you next week where we'll talk about bed sores, or otherwise known as pressure ulcers.